I'm Emma Sullivan, and 3 weeks ago I inherited $15 million from my Aunt Patricia. Yesterday, my parents showed up at my door, the same parents who abandoned me when I was 10 years old and disappeared for 18 years without a single phone call, birthday card, or explanation. They walked into that lawyer's office with smiles on their faces and legal documents in their hands, claiming they were still my legal guardians and had rights to my inheritance. What they didn't know was that my aunt had been preparing for this exact moment for nearly 2 decades, and she had left behind evidence that would expose the real reason they abandoned me all those years ago. Before I tell you this wild story of greed, betrayal, and shocking family secrets, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hit that like button if you've ever dealt with toxic family members who only show up when there's money involved, and make sure to subscribe because this channel is all about real stories that will leave you speechless. You think you know what family loyalty looks like, but wait until you hear the recordings my aunt secretly made of my parents trying to sell me for cash when I was just a child. This story has twists that will make your jaw drop. And by the end, you'll understand why sometimes the family that chooses you is worth more than the one you're born into. I'm 28 years old now, and until last month, I thought I had processed my abandonment. I had built a successful life as the head of marketing for Sullivan Tech Solutions, the company my Aunt Patricia spent 30 years building from nothing into a tech empire. I lived in her beautiful riverside estate in Portland, Oregon, managing both the business and preparing for life without the only real parent I had ever known. When Aunt Patricia passed away from lung cancer 2 months ago, I knew she had left me something. I expected maybe the house, perhaps a small inheritance to help me transition. What I didn't expect was to become one of the wealthiest young women in Oregon overnight. $15 million in liquid assets, plus the house worth another $3 million, plus full ownership of a tech company valued at over $20 million. I was still processing my grief and this overwhelming responsibility when my phone rang 3 days after the funeral. "Emma, sweetheart, it's Mom." I nearly dropped the phone. The voice I had spent years in therapy learning to stop waiting for was suddenly there, warm and familiar, as if no time had passed at all. "We saw Patricia's obituary online," she continued when I couldn't find words. "We're so sorry for your loss, honey. We know how close you two were. We're flying out tomorrow to be with you during this difficult time." They arrived at my door the next morning, like they had every right to be there. My father, Michael, now gray-haired and carrying extra weight around his middle, wearing a cheap suit that didn't quite fit. My mother, Karen, her once beautiful face marked by years of what looked like hard living, clutching a designer knockoff purse like a shield. "Look at you," my mother said, reaching for a hug I couldn't return. "You're so sophisticated now. Patricia really did well by you." The way she said Patricia's name, with a mixture of gratitude and resentment, immediately put me on edge. "We brought some of your baby photos," my father added, pulling out a small album. "Thought you might want them, especially now." His eyes kept darting around the spacious foyer, taking inventory of the artwork, the marble floors, the crystal chandelier. Everything about their behavior felt calculated. They insisted on taking me to lunch, where they spent 2 hours telling me about their life in Las Vegas. Dad managed a small electronics store now. Mom worked part-time at a medical clinic. They lived in a modest apartment and drove a 10-year-old Honda. They painted a picture of humble people who had overcome their demons and built a simple but honest life. But something felt wrong. The timing was too convenient. The sudden appearance after 18 years of complete silence, right after I inherited millions. The way they kept mentioning how overwhelming it must be to manage such wealth at my age. How families should stick together during major life transitions. The meeting with the lawyer was scheduled for the following Tuesday. They asked if they could come along for moral support. I agreed, mainly because I was too shocked by their reappearance to think clearly. I had no idea that Aunt Patricia had spent nearly 2 decades preparing for this exact scenario, or that my parents' return would expose secrets that would change everything I thought I knew about my childhood. Let me take you back to when my life was actually normal, before everything fell apart. I was born in Sacramento, California, and for the first 10 years of my life, I thought I had the perfect family. We lived in a cozy 3-bedroom house with a big backyard where my dad had built me a treehouse. Mom worked as a nurse at the local hospital, and Dad was a software engineer at a startup downtown. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable and happy. Saturday mornings meant pancakes shaped like animals that Dad would flip while making me laugh with his terrible jokes. Mom would braid my hair while we watched cartoons together. Summer evenings were spent in the backyard, roasting marshmallows over our fire pit, while Dad pointed out constellations. Christmas mornings were magical, with homemade cookies and stockings stuffed with little surprises. I remember feeling so secure in their love. Mom would tuck me in every night and tell me I was her sunshine girl. Dad taught me how to ride a bike, how to throw a baseball, and how to solve basic math problems. They came to every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every soccer game where I mostly picked dandelions in the outfield. But looking back now, there were signs I was too young to understand. The hushed arguments that happened after they thought I was asleep. The way Dad started coming home later and later, claiming he was working overtime on important projects. The strange phone calls that made him step outside, speaking in low, urgent tones. Mom began having what she called bad headaches that required special medicine that made her sleep for hours. I started noticing pills scattered on their bathroom counter. Little white ones, blue ones, some I'd never seen before. When I asked Mom about them, she'd say they were vitamins or medicine for her back pain from lifting patients at work. Dad's laptop was always open to websites I couldn't understand, filled with numbers and charts that made him stare at the screen with intense concentration. The atmosphere in our house slowly changed. Dinner conversations became strained. Dad would check his phone constantly, and sometimes he'd suddenly announce he had to go out for work emergencies that lasted until the next morning. Mom started calling in sick to work more frequently, spending entire days in bed with the curtains drawn. Money became a source of constant tension. I'd overhear fragments of arguments, something about credit cards being maxed out, about borrowing against the house, about just one more big win that would fix everything. I didn't understand what any of it meant, but I could feel the stress radiating from both of them. I tried so hard to be the perfect daughter. I kept my room spotless, did my homework without being reminded, never asked for toys or treats when we went to the store. I thought if I could just be good enough, quiet enough, helpful enough, whatever was wrong would magically fix itself. I started making my own breakfast and packing my own lunch when I realized Mom was too tired to do it most mornings. The last few months before they left were the worst. Dad would disappear for entire weekends, returning home exhausted and agitated. Mom barely got out of bed except to take more of her medicine. I learned to do my own laundry and started walking to school by myself when they forgot to drive me. I remember one particularly bad night when I woke up to shouting from their bedroom. I crept to their door and heard Dad crying, actually sobbing, while telling Mom he had lost something important and that they were coming for him. Mom was begging him to stop, to get help, to think about me. He kept saying it was too late, that he had messed up too badly this time. The next morning, they were both unusually cheerful at breakfast, which scared me more than their fighting had. They kept hugging me and telling me how much they loved me, like they were saying goodbye. I asked if everything was okay, and they assured me it was, but something in their eyes told a different story. 3 days later, I woke up to complete silence. No coffee brewing, no shower running, no morning news playing on the TV. That's when I found the note that would change my life forever, and when Aunt Patricia became the only family I had left. It was a Tuesday morning in March, unusually rainy for Sacramento. I remember the sound of water hitting my bedroom window when I woke up, and the strange quietness that filled our house. Usually, I'd hear Mom getting ready for her shift at the hospital or Dad brewing his morning coffee while checking emails. But that morning, there was nothing. I called out, "Mom? Dad?" as I padded down the hallway in my pajamas, but got no response. Their bedroom door was wide open, which was weird because Mom always kept it closed when she was having one of her bad days. I peeked inside and saw something that made my stomach drop. The closet doors were hanging open, and most of the clothes were gone. Dad's side of the dresser was completely empty except for a few old socks. I ran to the kitchen, hoping to find them making breakfast, but instead found a single piece of notebook paper propped against the salt shaker. In Mom's handwriting, it said, "Emma, we had to go away for a while. Your Aunt Patricia is coming to get you. We love you. Mom and Dad." That was it. 22 words to explain why my entire world had just disappeared. I stood there in my Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles pajamas, reading those words over and over, waiting for them to make sense. I kept thinking this had to be some kind of mistake, maybe a bad dream I hadn't woken up from yet. I called Mom's cell phone. It went straight to voicemail. Dad's number was already disconnected. I spent that entire day sitting by the front window, convinced they would come back and explain this was all some terrible misunderstanding. Maybe they had a family emergency they couldn't tell me about. Maybe they were in some kind of danger and had to protect me by leaving. My 10-year-old brain created a dozen explanations that made more sense than the truth I wasn't ready to accept. By evening, I was getting scared. I had eaten cereal for breakfast and lunch because I didn't know how to cook anything else. The house felt enormous and empty. Every shadow looked threatening, and every sound made me think someone was breaking in. I called my best friend Jessica's mom, Mrs. Martinez, and told her my parents had to go out of town suddenly, and I wasn't sure when they'd be back. She came over immediately, took one look at the empty closets and the note, and called the police. 2 officers arrived within an hour. Officer Williams, a kind woman with gentle eyes, and Officer Rodriguez, who spoke to me like I was an adult instead of a scared kid. They asked me questions about my parents' behavior, whether they had seemed upset or worried, if I knew of any relatives who might know where they went. That's when I remembered Aunt Patricia. I had only met her twice, once at my grandmother's funeral when I was 7, and once when she visited for Christmas 2 years earlier. She was Dad's older sister, and she lived somewhere in Oregon. She seemed nice but serious, wore expensive clothes, and talked mostly to the adults about business things I didn't understand. Officer Williams found Patricia's contact information in my dad's address book and called her from our kitchen phone. I listened to one side of the conversation. "Ma'am, this is Sacramento Police Department. Your brother Michael and his wife have apparently abandoned their 10-year-old daughter. No note explaining where they went? Yes, she's been alone for over 24 hours now." There was a long pause, then, "I understand this is sudden, but she has no other family in the area. Child Protective Services will need to place her somewhere tonight if we can't reach a relative." "Thank you, ma'am. Tomorrow morning would be perfect." Mrs. Martinez stayed with me that night, helping me pack a suitcase with clothes and my favorite stuffed animals. I kept asking if she thought my parents would come back, and she kept saying, "I don't know, honey, but you're going to be okay." The next morning, Aunt Patricia arrived in a black BMW that looked completely out of place on our middle-class street. She wore a charcoal business suit and moved with the kind of confidence that made everyone around her stand a little straighter. She didn't cry or seem emotional. She just looked at me with a mixture of determination and something I couldn't identify then, but now recognize as fury. "Pack what you need," she told me, her voice firm but not unkind. "Everything else can be shipped later." That's how my old life ended, and my new one began. The drive from Sacramento to Portland took 8 hours, and Aunt Patricia barely spoke for the first half of it. She asked if I was hungry, if I needed a bathroom break, if the air conditioning was too cold, but nothing beyond basic necessities. I stared out the window, watching my entire world disappear behind us, clutching my stuffed elephant that I was suddenly embarrassed to still need at 10 years old. Around hour 4, she finally broke the silence. "Emma, I want you to understand something. I never planned to have children. I don't know how to braid hair or make Halloween costumes or any of the things your mother did. But I will make sure you have everything you need to succeed in life. That's my promise to you." It wasn't the warm, motherly comfort I was craving, but something about her directness was actually reassuring. She wasn't going to lie to me or pretend this situation was anything other than what it was. Riverside Manor took my breath away. It sat on 3 acres overlooking the Willamette River, a stunning modern house with floor-to-ceiling windows and clean lines that looked like something from a magazine. My bedroom was larger than our entire living room back home, with its own bathroom and a walk-in closet that echoed when I spoke. The rules started immediately. Breakfast was at 7 sharp every morning before school. Homework was completed at the desk in my room, not on beds or couches. 1 hour of piano practice daily, whether I showed talent or not. Dinner was formal. We sat at the dining room table, used proper silverware, and discussed current events. No television on school nights. Chores were assigned and expected to be completed without reminders. I broke every single rule in the first month. I was late to breakfast, skipped piano practice, did homework on my bed, and threw a complete tantrum when she tried to make me discuss the news during dinner. I think part of me was testing whether she would send me away too if I was difficult enough. But Aunt Patricia never threatened to get rid of me. Instead, she implemented what she called logical consequences. Late to breakfast meant no breakfast, and a reminder that the kitchen closed at 7:30. Skipped piano practice meant no weekend activities until I made up the time. Homework on the bed resulted in the removal of all furniture except the desk and chair until I proved I could use them properly. Behind her strict exterior, though, I occasionally glimpsed something unexpected. Like when she found me crying over a photo of my parents at Christmas, and instead of telling me to move on, she quietly handed me tissues and sat with me until I stopped. Or when I failed a spelling test despite studying for hours, and she hired a tutor rather than lecturing me about trying harder. Aunt Patricia had built Sullivan Tech Solutions from nothing. She started as a programmer fresh out of college, worked for other companies for 10 years, then launched her own consulting firm from a 1-bedroom apartment. By the time I came to live with her, she employed over 200 people and had clients across the country. She worked long hours but always returned home for dinner, often bringing her laptop to finish projects afterward. On weekends, she took me to business meetings, expecting me to observe quietly and learn. "Watch how people negotiate," she would instruct during car rides. "Notice who speaks first, who makes eye contact, who gives ground too easily." Business is psychology applied to problem solving. School was another adjustment. She enrolled me at Westfield Academy, a private school with small classes and high academic expectations. The transition was brutal. My public school in Sacramento hadn't prepared me for the advanced coursework, and the other kids came from wealthy families with very different experiences than mine. I struggled with everything. The math was too advanced, the reading assignments were longer than anything I'd encountered, and I had no idea how to navigate the social dynamics of kids who spent summers in Europe and had nannies instead of babysitters. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, convinced I would never belong in this world of privilege and pressure. But Aunt Patricia wouldn't accept defeat. "Your circumstances change through no choice of your own," she told me one night when I was sobbing over geometry homework. "But your response to those circumstances is entirely your choice. You can rise to this challenge or be defeated by it. I don't invest time in lost causes." It wasn't the gentle encouragement I wanted, but her blunt pragmatism somehow steadied me. I realized she believed I could succeed, even when I didn't believe it myself. By the time I graduated from University of Oregon with a degree in business and marketing, my relationship with Aunt Patricia had evolved into something I never expected, a genuine partnership. She had groomed me to eventually take over Sullivan Tech Solutions, and I had discovered I actually had a talent for the business world she had introduced me to. I moved back to Riverside Manor after college and took a position as marketing director. We developed a comfortable routine: two independent women sharing space, occasional meals, and a thriving business. Patricia was in her early 60s then, still sharp as ever, still putting in 12-hour days and expecting excellence from everyone around her. I dated occasionally, though Patricia had strong opinions about anyone who might distract from my career advancement. "Relationships are fine," she would say, "but never compromise your independence for someone who hasn't proven they're worthy of that sacrifice." It was typical Patricia: practical advice delivered without sentiment, but rooted in genuine care for my future. Then 2 years ago, everything changed when Patricia started having a persistent cough that wouldn't go away. She dismissed it for months as stress or allergies, but when she finally agreed to see a doctor, the diagnosis hit us like a freight train: lung cancer, stage 4. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. She had never smoked a day in her life. "We all die," she said matter-of-factly when the oncologist delivered the prognosis. "The only variables are when and how we use the time before that happens." Even facing her own mortality, Patricia approached it with the same methodical determination she applied to everything else. She continued working as long as physically possible, gradually transitioning more responsibilities to me as her strength declined. Our roles slowly reversed. I became the one scheduling her medical appointments, managing her medications, and making sure she ate enough to maintain her weight during chemotherapy. During those final months, a surprising softness emerged in Patricia that I had never seen before. She started sharing stories about her childhood with my father, about building her business from nothing, about the loneliness she had accepted as the price of success. One evening, as I helped her into bed after a particularly difficult day of treatment, she gripped my hand with unexpected strength. "Taking you in was the best decision I ever made," she whispered. "You gave my life a purpose I never knew I was missing." It was the closest she had ever come to saying she loved me, and it meant everything. Patricia died peacefully in her sleep on a quiet Sunday morning in February. I found her when I brought her morning coffee, looking serene in a way she rarely had while awake. The funeral was small but dignified: business associates, a few longtime employees, and some distant relatives I barely knew. I stood at the graveside realizing that she had become my real mother in every way that mattered. The grief was overwhelming. The house felt enormous and empty without her presence. I would catch myself saving articles I thought might interest her, or picking up the phone to call her office before remembering she wouldn't be there. But I threw myself into running the business as she had taught me, honoring her legacy through action rather than just sentiment. 3 weeks after the funeral, I received a formal letter from James Thompson, Patricia's attorney for over 20 years. The will reading was scheduled for the following Thursday at 2 p.m. at his downtown office. The letter mentioned that all interested parties would be present, but I assumed this meant business partners or perhaps some charitable organizations Patricia might have included. Thompson was a distinguished man in his 70s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. His office smelled of leather and coffee, with dark wood paneling and legal books lining every wall. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in a navy suit Patricia would have approved of. Thompson greeted me warmly, expressing condolences before mentioning that we were waiting for a few others before beginning. I settled into one of the leather chairs, flipping through a business magazine without absorbing any of the content, expecting to see some of Patricia's business partners, or perhaps her accountant. The door opened and I looked up, expecting familiar faces from the company. Instead, standing in the doorway were two people I had convinced myself I would never see again: My parents. After 18 years of complete silence, they had somehow found their way to my aunt's will reading, and something about their presence there felt anything but coincidental. Time seemed to freeze as I stared at my parents standing in Thompson's doorway. My father, Michael, had aged dramatically. His once thick brown hair was now completely gray and thinning, deep lines carved paths around his eyes, and he had gained at least 60 pounds. He wore an ill-fitting navy blazer that looked like it came from a discount store. My mother, Karen, looked even more transformed. Her blonde hair was cut in a severe bob that didn't flatter her gaunt face, and dark circles shadowed her eyes despite heavy makeup. She clutched a knockoff designer purse with white-knuckled intensity and wore a dress that might have been fashionable a decade ago. "Emma," my father said, his voice rougher and deeper than I remembered. "Look at you. You're beautiful." They moved toward me, and I found myself rising on unsteady legs, my body moving independently of my shocked mind. My mother reached for an embrace that I couldn't return. I stood rigid as her arms encircled me, overwhelmed by a perfume that was both familiar and completely foreign. "We've been trying to find you for years," she said, stepping back to examine me. "You look so much like Patricia now, so sophisticated." "How did you know about today?" I managed to ask, my voice sounding strange in my own ears. "We saw Patricia's obituary in the Portland Tribune online," my father explained, attempting what looked like a sad smile. "We've been keeping track of the family from a distance. We knew you were with Patricia, and we wanted to pay our respects." The casual admission that they had known where I was all these years, but never reached out, hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the back of my chair to steady myself. "Please, everyone sit down," Thompson interjected, his professional demeanor not quite hiding his discomfort. "We have one more person joining us before we begin." An older woman I recognized as Mrs. Anderson, Patricia's longtime housekeeper, entered the room. She had worked for Patricia for 15 years and had always been kind to me in her quiet way. She nodded at me sympathetically before taking a seat as far from my parents as possible. While we waited for Thompson to begin, my parents attempted awkward small talk that felt surreal. "We live in Las Vegas now," my mother offered. "The dry climate is better for your father's back problems." "I manage a small electronics repair shop," my father added. "Nothing fancy, but it pays the bills. We've been clean for 8 years now. No gambling, no pills. We've built a simple but honest life." I nodded mechanically, unable to formulate responses. Inside, my emotions churned violently. Anger, confusion, hurt, and a treacherous flicker of hope all battled for dominance. Thompson cleared his throat and opened a thick folder. "We are here to execute the last will and testament of Patricia Marie Sullivan," he began formally. "I'll summarize the key provisions before providing copies to the relevant parties." My parents leaned forward slightly, an almost imperceptible movement that suddenly made their presence at this reading crystal clear. They hadn't come for closure or to pay respects. They had come for money. Thompson adjusted his glasses. "To my niece, Emma Catherine Sullivan, I leave the entirety of my estate, including the property at 4247 Riverside Drive and all its contents. My full ownership of Sullivan Tech Solutions valued at approximately $22 million, all bank accounts and investment portfolios totaling approximately $15 million in liquid assets, my personal effects including jewelry and automobiles, and all intellectual property related to my business ventures." The room fell completely silent. I had expected to inherit something substantial, but the scope of the bequest was staggering. Patricia had been wealthy, but I hadn't fully grasped just how successful she had become. My father coughed lightly. "Excuse me, Mr. Thompson, but is there anything else? Any provisions for other family members?" Thompson looked at him over his glasses with barely concealed distaste. "There are some smaller bequests to longtime employees," he said, nodding toward Mrs. Anderson, "and detailed instructions for charitable donations. But the bulk of the estate passes to Emma, as I've stated. My mother's smile tightened as she reached over to pat my hand. Well, this is quite a responsibility for someone so young. Fortunately, as her parents, we're in a position to help her navigate these complex financial waters. My father nodded eagerly. Legally speaking, since Emma was a minor when Patricia took her in, and we never formally terminated our parental rights, we remain her legal guardians. We'd be happy to assist with managing these assets. The panic that shot through me was immediate and visceral. The words legal guardians hit me like a punch to the stomach. After 18 years of silence, they wanted to control my inheritance. I opened my mouth to object, but Thompson spoke first. I believe there's some confusion about the legal status here, he said calmly, reaching for another folder. Perhaps we should clarify a few things before proceeding. He opened the file and removed several official-looking documents. When Emma came into Patricia's care, temporary guardianship was established through family court. However, after extensive attempts to contact you both regarding permanent arrangements, the court moved forward with a different solution. My father frowned. We were dealing with serious personal issues and moving frequently. We never received any official notices. Indeed, Thompson continued, his tone growing colder. After 6 months of failed contact attempts, someone did reach out to the court claiming to represent you both. He removed another document. A man named Vincent Torres appeared with signed affidavits allegedly from both of you, consenting to permanent custody transfer to Patricia Sullivan. My parents exchanged a quick glance that lasted just a moment too long. We never authorized anyone to represent us, my father said. Those signatures must be forgeries. Thompson adjusted his glasses. Patricia had similar concerns at the time. She hired a private investigator to locate you directly and confirm your intentions. He opened yet another file, this one thick with photographs and reports. The investigator documented Mr. Sullivan's activities at various casinos in Las Vegas and Reno during this period. He also documented Mrs. Sullivan working at several establishments in the same cities. My mother's face went pale. We were trying to rebuild our lives. When approached about Emma's situation, Thompson continued relentlessly, you both explicitly confirmed your desire to terminate parental responsibilities. Furthermore, the investigator documented a payment of $25,000 from Vincent Torres to Mr. Sullivan the day after those affidavits were signed. That was an unrelated business transaction, my father protested weakly. Thompson ignored him. Most significantly, Patricia left this letter to be opened in exactly this circumstance. He handed me a sealed envelope bearing my name in Patricia's precise handwriting. My hands shook as I broke the seal. The letter was several pages long, and I began reading aloud, my voice steadier than I felt. My dearest Emma, if you are reading this, it means I have passed on, and your parents have suddenly reappeared in your life. This is not a coincidence. I looked up briefly to see my mother dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Over the years, I have documented multiple instances where they attempted to extract money from me using you as leverage. 6 months after you came to live with me, your father contacted me demanding $50,000 in exchange for not challenging the guardianship arrangement. I paid it, fearing a custody battle would traumatize you further. My father was staring at the floor now, his face flushed red. When you turned 16, your mother called claiming she needed money for cancer treatment. My investigator confirmed this was false. When you received your college acceptance letter, they somehow obtained your contact information and sent emails requesting tuition money for what they called a fresh start to rebuild our family relationship. I blocked these communications to protect you. Tears blurred my vision, but I forced myself to continue. I never told you these things because I wanted you to heal without additional betrayal. Now they will likely attempt to access your inheritance through guilt, legal threats, or emotional manipulation. I turned to the final page. Thompson has all necessary documentation to protect you. The guardianship was converted to legal adoption when you were 16. You have been legally my daughter since then, and they have no claim to you or your inheritance. Whatever you decide about a relationship with your biological parents must be your choice, but please protect yourself. Remember that family is built through consistent actions, not DNA. All my love, Mom. I carefully refolded the letter, the word Mom, hitting me harder than anything else Patricia had ever given me. Thompson cleared his throat. I have the adoption papers here, legally binding and properly executed. I also have documentation of every financial solicitation mentioned in the letter, including recorded phone calls. He turned to my stunned parents. Additionally, Patricia included a specific clause that any legal challenge to these arrangements would result in the entire estate transferring to a Children's Advocacy Foundation. There would be nothing left for anyone to claim. My father stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. You people stole our daughter. Actually, I said quietly, finding my voice, you sold me. And Patricia bought me a future you never could have given me. I looked directly at them. I want you to leave. Now. Don't contact me again. As security escorted them out, my mother turned back one last time. You'll regret this when you're alone with nothing but money. I won't be alone, I replied. I have the family Patricia built for me. People who show up without expecting payment. After they left, Thompson smiled for the first time that day. Your aunt would be very proud. You handled that exactly as she hoped you would. Standing in that office, I realized that sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money. It's learning the difference between people who love you and people who love what you can give them.